"I'll eat you alive tonight," the wanted mountain man warned the obese girl, but she said. Blackstone's main street woke to the hiss of wheat-colored dust and the slap of fresh posters against split-rail fences. By noon, every hitching post and church gate was papered with the same stark face, the same bristling beard, the same iron-gray eyes. Wanted, Elias Thornwood. $500 for the man who, they swore, burned his wife and child and fed the fire with his soul. Hazel Morrison read those words once, twice, until the black ink quivered. She was 22, round-hipped, soft-cheeked, and trembling beneath the saloon's awning while laughter clattered through the swinging doors behind her. A week ago, she'd been sold like a hog at spring market. Brutus Cain had bragged, tossing 3 gold eagles into her father's palm. Tonight, his breath had come hot and sour at her ear as he snapped, "You're mine to use?" And only the glass bottle in her fist, smashed and wetting his scalp scarlet, had bought her the alley and her legs and the dark. She ran for the tree line with the posters snapping like crows in the wind, past the charcoal kilns, past the creek, past anything with a name. She plunged into pines that thickened until the world became bark and pitch and heartbeat. Branches scored her arms, roots took her ankles. She didn't stop until the town's jeers were swallowed by the hush of high country and a slick-bellied moon hauled itself up the spine of the ridge. At last she collapsed by a cold-run stream that stitched silver through the stones. Her chest hitched, her palms burned. The night breathed resin and frost and something else, something watching. A shadow broke from the timber. He was taller than the lies said, broader than the myths allowed, the kind of big that rearranged the air. Beard wild, coat torn, a scar notched his cheekbone like a tally. The iron gray of his eyes didn't waver as he took her in, dress torn, lips split, fear bright as a lantern. Hazel's throat worked. I'm only passing through." "That'd be a mistake," he said, voice like gravel thawing. "These woods bite." She pushed herself up, wobbling. "I can take the bite." He stepped closer. Pine needles cracked under his boots. He smelled of smoke and snowmelt and distance. "You know my name?" Her gaze flicked to the rifle slung at his back, to the knife at his belt, to the posters that had chased her feet. "Everyone does." "Then you know what they say I am." A scoff that wasn't quite a laugh. "Turn around now." Something raw and stubborn rose in her. "If I turn around, I die." He studied her, long and unsparing, then lowered his head until the cold of his breath touched her cheek. "Last warning," he murmured, and the words were a dare, not a promise. "I'll eat you alive tonight." Hazel lifted her chin, swallowed her shaking, and said, very quietly, "Then you'll have to start with my fear." "Where are you listening from tonight? What corner of the world found you under these same stars?" By dawn, the forest had turned to silver and shadow. Hazel woke to the slow burn of light filtering through the pines, her dress stiff with dew, her feet numb from the cold earth. Somewhere nearby, an axe bit into wood, steady, patient, merciless. She froze. Through a veil of mist, she saw him again, the wanted man, Elias Thornwood. His back was to her, shoulders broad beneath a weathered coat. Each swing of the axe was clean, practiced, heavy with restraint. When he stopped, his breath came in quiet plumes, and for a brief moment, the world was still. Hazel's first thought was to run. But run where? Back to Blackstone, to Brutus Cain's fists? To the sheriff who'd sell her out for the reward on this man's head? No, There was no going back. She took one step forward. A twig snapped beneath her shoe. Elias turned. Their eyes met, the hunted and the discarded. "What are you still doing here?" he asked, voice low, more weary than angry. "You had the night to get gone." Hazel hesitated, arms folded across her chest. "There's nowhere else to go." Elias set the axe against the stump, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his scarred hand. "Then you picked a fool's place to hide. This forest eats the weak alive." "I'm not weak." He studied her a long moment, the gray of his eyes unreadable. Then he nodded toward a rough shelter of timber and stone tucked beneath a ledge. Smoke coiled from its chimney. "You'll freeze if you stay out here. Sit by the fire, that's all I'm offering." Hazel followed him inside the crude cabin, walls lined with furs, a small hearth burning steady, a table made from split logs. The air smelled of pine sap and something wild, feral yet clean. Elias poured water from a tin kettle into a wooden cup and handed it to her without a word. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching it with trembling fingers. He sat opposite her, elbows on his knees, gaze fixed on the flames. "You from town?" She nodded. "Blackstone?" His jaw tightened. "That cesspit still poisoning the valley?" "Yes," she murmured, "and the people in it." He looked up at that. "What did they do to you?" Hazel swallowed hard, staring into the fire. "Sold me? $30? To a saloon keeper?" Elias's expression didn't change, but the muscles in his forearms tensed. "For what reason?" "Because I was too much." Her voice broke on the word. "Too heavy, too hungry, too alive. They said no man would ever want me, so they found one who didn't care what he owned as long as he could pay for it." Elias said nothing. Only the fire crackled between them. "He tried to—" Hazel's breath faltered. "He tried to take me. I hit him with a bottle and ran. That's how I ended up here." Silence stretched, thick, uncomfortable, full of things that didn't need saying. Then, quietly, Elias spoke. "You did what you had to do." She looked at him surprised. "You believe me?" His gaze flicked to hers, unwavering. "I've seen the kind of men who hide behind titles, the ones who wear law on their lips and rot in their hearts. You ran. That makes you smarter than most." Hazel's eyes stung. No one had ever said words like that to her, not her family, not a soul. Elias rose and reached for a small pouch of herbs hanging near the window. "Drink this," he said, dropping a few leaves into the cup. "It'll help you sleep. Tomorrow you'll move on." "Too dangerous to stay with me." "Because of the bounty?" He nodded. $500 for my head. That kind of gold makes men stupid." Hazel took a sip of the bitter tea. "What did you really do, Elias?" He paused at the door, the question catching him like a blade between the ribs. For a long moment, he didn't turn. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than the fire's whisper. "I buried my wife and son with my own hands. Then I watched the world call it murder." Hazel's heart clenched. She wanted to ask more, but she saw something in his eyes that stopped her, the kind of grief that no words could touch. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Elias nodded once, as if that simple apology weighed more than any defense. "Sleep while you can. Morning comes fast in these woods." When he stepped outside, Hazel lay down by the fire, the warmth wrapped around her like a promise she didn't trust. She listened to the rhythm of his footsteps fading into the trees, and for the first time in her life, she felt safer beside a man the world called a monster than among those who called themselves good. The morning broke sharp and cold, light slanting through the trees like spears of pale gold. Elias was already outside when Hazel stepped from the cabin, wrapped in one of his old wool coats that hung heavy on her frame. Frost still glittered on the moss and pine needles. He was skinning a rabbit, hands sure and silent, every movement clean, efficient, precise. He didn't look up when he said, "You should be gone by now." Hazel tightened the coat around herself. "If I leave, I die. If I stay, maybe I have a chance." Elias set the knife down, wiped his hands, and finally looked at her. "You think hiding beside a wanted man gives you a chance?" "I think kindness is rarer than safety," she replied softly. Something flickered across his face, something too quick to name. Then he nodded toward the fire pit. "Eat first, talk after." He cooked the rabbit over the flames, the smell of meat and pine smoke filling the air. Hazel's stomach growled loud enough that she blushed. Elias handed her a piece of meat on a flat rock. She hesitated, then took it. "You act like you've never eaten before," he muttered. "Not food this warm," she said, chewing slowly, "or this clean." That made him glance at her again. There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. When they finished, he stood, slinging his rifle across his shoulder. "You'll follow me. I'm heading deeper into the ridge. If you slow me down, I'll leave you behind." Hazel looked at the trees stretching endlessly around them. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere the law doesn't climb," Elias said, "and where men like Cain can't touch you." She blinked at him, surprised. "You'd really help me?" He shrugged. "You're alive because I didn't leave you to freeze. Don't mistake that for mercy." But Hazel knew better. He could have abandoned her a dozen times by now. Instead, he'd shared food, warmth, and the smallest fragment of trust. They began the climb before noon. The path wound through ravines and narrow passes, roots twisted over rocks slick with moss. Hazel stumbled more than once, cursing softly, but Elias was always just ahead, a dark silhouette framed by the pale sky. When she tripped over a root and fell hard, she cried out. Before she could rise, he was there, hand extended. "Careful," he said, pulling her up easily. "These woods don't forgive clumsiness." "Neither do you," she shot back, breathless but smiling. For the first time, he almost smiled too. "Maybe you'll learn." Hours passed. They crossed a stream half frozen in the shadows, water biting cold against their boots. Elias moved with the grace of someone who had lived half his life among these mountains. Hazel followed with stubborn determination. At one point, he stopped, pointing toward the valley below. "See that ridge line? Past there, they call it Devil's Bend. Too steep for horses. That's where we'll stop for the night." By the time they reached it, dusk was falling. The temperature dropped sharply. Elias gathered dry wood and built a fire in a hollow beneath an overhang of rock. Hazel helped as best she could, fingers clumsy and numb. When the flames caught, her cheeks glowed in the flickering light. Elias watched her quietly. "You learn fast." "I had to," she said. "People like me don't survive otherwise." He tossed another branch into the fire. "People like you?" "The ones nobody wants, the ones they laugh at for being too much, too soft, too slow, the ones who still care." Elias was silent for a long time, staring into the flames. "Caring gets you killed out here," he said finally. "Maybe," Hazel replied, "but not caring kills you slower." The wind sighed through the trees, carrying the smell of rain. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The firelight danced over Elias's scarred face, softening it. Hazel studied him in silence, the curve of his jaw, the roughness of his hands, the haunted distance in his eyes. "You weren't born for this kind of life," she said quietly. "No one is," he replied. "But some of us end up here anyway." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think about them? Your wife and son?" Elias didn't answer at first. His shoulders tensed, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was rough, uneven. "Every time I close my eyes—" "I'm sorry," Hazel said. "I wish I could take that pain from you." He shook his head slowly. "Pain's the only thing that reminds me they were real." She moved closer, the heat of the fire and his presence warming her equally. "You're not what they say, Elias. I see it. You're not a killer." He looked at her sharply, but she didn't flinch. "I see a man who still carries love inside him," she said, "even if it hurts too much to touch." For a long moment, neither spoke. The night deepened, and the forest closed around them. Then Elias said, almost to himself, "You should be afraid of me." Hazel shook her head. "I was, but you keep saving me." He laughed softly, a sound like stones shifting under water. "You talk too much." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should stop giving me reasons to." Elias stared at her, something fierce and fragile flickering behind his eyes. He reached out, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "You don't know what kind of man I am, Hazel." She met his gaze steadily. "Then let me be the one who finds out." The fire crackled between them, the flames painting gold over their shadows. Outside, the wind howled, but inside that circle of light, the hunted man and the unwanted girl found something the world had denied them both: warmth. And though neither would say it aloud, the journey that began with fear had already started to feel like home. The snows came early that year. By the third morning, frost coated every pine needle, every fallen log, turning the forest into a cathedral of ice. Hazel woke to the sound of the wind dragging over the mountain, a long, mournful hum that made the timbers of their shelter groan. Elias had already been up for hours. She found him outside, chopping wood bare-armed, the breath rolling from his mouth in clouds. His body moved with a rhythm that seemed older than words. Lift, swing, crack. He looked untamed, elemental. For a heartbeat, she just watched him, the blur of muscle and scar, the way he seemed to belong to the wilderness itself. "You plan to stare all morning?" he asked without looking up. Hazel flushed and wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I was deciding whether to make coffee or run before you notice I burned it again." He half turned, one eyebrow lifting. "You can burn coffee?" "Apparently, yes," she said, trying not to smile. Elias's mouth twitched, the closest thing to laughter she'd seen from him. "Make it anyway. Smoke keeps the wolves guessing." Inside, Hazel brewed what passed for coffee in the mountains. Bitter roots roasted black, boiled with melted snow. She poured him a cup, careful not to spill. When he took it, his fingers brushed hers, rough, calloused, warm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Thank you," he said quietly. Hazel looked down. "You keep saying that, like you're not the one keeping me alive." "I keep saying it," Elias replied, "because I haven't said it in 2 years." The words hung between them, heavy as winter air. Hazel wanted to ask more, but she sensed he'd said all he could for now. So she changed the subject. "The door still sticks when it freezes," she said. "If you cut a new plank, I can fit it." He glanced up at her. "You know how to do that?" I grew up fixing everything that broke, Hazel said with a shrug. When you're the girl nobody wants to help, you learn to do it yourself. Something softened in his face then. Not pity, but respect. All right, he said. We'll fix it together after breakfast. That became their rhythm. They worked side by side through the short days, hauling logs, patching the roof with bark, building snares. Hazel learned to start a fire with a single strike of flint. Elias learned to eat her biscuits without grimacing, most of the time. She laughed more, spoke louder. He listened longer, smiled easier. At night, when the cold pressed close, they sat near the fire. She would tell him stories from town, the ridiculous gossip, the preachers with more greed than faith, the saloon songs that mocked the rich. Elias would listen with that faint curve at the corner of his mouth, as if he was remembering how it felt to be human. Sometimes he talked too, not of the fire that took his family, but of before, how he'd built the cabin with his own hands, how his son Daniel used to collect pine cones because they looked like sleeping dragons, how his wife Martha used to hum while she cooked. I never thought I'd hear her voice again, he said once, staring into the fire. But sometimes, when the wind moves right through these trees, I swear it sounds like her. Hazel touched his arm. Maybe it is her. Maybe she's glad you survived. He shook his head. She'd have wanted peace, not this. You call this not peace? Hazel smiled faintly, gesturing at the quiet cabin, the firelight, the snow falling beyond the window. I call it peace with a heartbeat. Elias looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time in years, his gaze held something gentler than grief. The first snowstorm came 3 weeks later. It hit like a living thing, wind howling, snow sweeping sideways, thunder echoing off the peaks. Elias bolted the shutters, but the cold still found its way in, threading through every crack. Stay by the fire, he told her. Only if you do, Hazel said, pulling a fur blanket around both of them. When the storm worsened, he moved closer to feed the flames. She could feel the heat of his body through the blanket, could smell smoke and pine and the faint salt of his skin. I hate storms, she whispered. They sound like the world's ending. World's ended plenty of times, he said softly. We're still here. Lightning flashed through the window, turning his face pale gold for a heartbeat. Hazel saw every scar, every line carved by years of pain. And yet she saw strength there, too, a man still capable of kindness, of love, even after everything had burned. When thunder cracked overhead, she startled. Instinctively, Elias drew her closer. It's just noise, he murmured. It can't touch you. But the way his arms closed around her, solid, protective, trembling slightly, told her it wasn't just her he was trying to reassure. For a long time, they stayed that way. Hazel's cheek rested against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, slow and steady, the sound of a man who had stopped running, if only for a moment. When the storm finally eased, she whispered, Elias? If this is wrong, us being here, I don't care. He drew back just enough to look into her eyes. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do, Hazel said, her voice shaking but sure. You keep calling yourself a monster, but you saved me. You made me feel safe for the first time in my life. That's not what monsters do. Elias's jaw tightened. You don't understand the things I've done to survive. Then let me. He stared at her for a long moment, breath shallow. The fire popped, throwing sparks between them, and then, slowly, he reached out, rough fingers brushing her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw. "Hazel, don't push me away," she whispered. He didn't. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then desperate, the kind of kiss that felt like it was saving something broken in both of them. He tasted of smoke and regret and warmth, and she melted against him like snow into spring water. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers. "I can't promise you safety," he said, voice trembling. "Only truth." "Then tell me the truth." He smiled, the kind of small, fragile smile that comes after too much silence. "The truth is, I don't remember the last time I felt alive. Until now." Hazel pressed her hand against his heart. "Then don't forget this one." Outside, the wind softened to a whisper. Inside, the fire burned low, the cabin breathing in time with their hearts. For the first time in 2 years, Elias Thornwood slept without nightmares. The thaw came late that year. When the snow finally loosened its grip on the mountains, the air smelled of wet bark and distant rain. Hazel swept the cabin floor as sunlight spilled through the window, the first real light in months. She hummed softly, one hand resting on her growing belly. Elias watched from the doorway, quiet as ever, his shadow long across the wood. It had been 3 months since that storm, 3 months since he'd let someone touch the pieces of his heart he thought were gone forever. Hazel had brought life back to his silence. She had given him reason to build again, to believe again. But the mountains were never quiet for long. That morning he found tracks near the creek, boot prints, deep and deliberate, leading toward the ridge. Men, maybe 3 or 4, heavy enough to carry rifles. His jaw clenched as he crouched, tracing the edges with his fingertips. The snow around them had melted in uneven patches. They'd been here less than a day. He returned to the cabin, trying to mask the storm in his chest. "Everything all right?" Hazel asked, sensing the tension in him instantly. "Tracks near the bend," he said, checking the bullets in his rifle. "Could be hunters, could be worse." Her hand froze on the broom. "You think they're after you? After $500? His tone was grim. "There's always someone." Hazel moved closer, touching his arm. "Then we'll leave. We can pack food, move east. You said there's a valley—" "No," Elias interrupted. "If they're tracking me, moving makes us easier to find." "Then what do we do?" His eyes softened when he looked at her. "We stay quiet. You stay inside. I'll handle it." Hazel wanted to argue, but she saw something in his expression. That soldier's edge, the calm before violence. And her voice faltered. For 2 days, the woods held their breath. Elias set traps further down the ridge, left false trails to confuse whoever followed. Hazel waited by the fire, sleepless, every sound outside the cabin sharpening her nerves. On the 3rd night, it happened. A crack echoed in the distance, not the snap of a branch, but the metallic bite of a rifle. Elias moved fast, snatching his gun, signaling Hazel to stay low. Through the narrow slit of the window, he saw them, 3 men climbing through the trees, their coats bearing the dull star badges of bounty hunters. The lead one carried a poster, his face staring back at him from the paper, the same cold accusation beneath his name. "Elias Thornwood," the man shouted. "We know you're out here. Come out quiet, and maybe we'll let your woman live." Hazel's breath caught. Elias's blood ran cold. "Stay down," he whispered. but Hazel's voice shook with anger. "They know I'm here?" "Someone talked," he said. "Maybe from Blackstone, maybe Kane. Doesn't matter now." He checked the window again. The men were spreading out, moving closer, rifles raised. The world outside had gone still, as if even the forest knew to wait for the first gunshot. Elias turned to her, his voice low, urgent. "If I don't come back—" "Don't say that," she whispered. "You run east," he continued, ignoring the tremor in her tone. "There's a hollow near the waterfall. You stay there till it's safe. I won't run from you again." "You will if you love me." Before she could answer, glass shattered. A bullet tore through the window, splintering the wall inches above her head. Hazel screamed. Elias pulled her to the floor, returning fire through the opening. The forest erupted in chaos. Gunfire cracked like thunder, echoing through the cliffs. Elias moved with the precision of an old soldier, firing, ducking, reloading, each shot methodical, controlled. 2 men went down quickly. The third circled wide, trying to flank the cabin. Hazel crawled toward the back door. "He's going around," she shouted. "I see him," Elias growled, stepping outside. The last hunter lunged from behind a tree, rifle raised. But Hazel was faster. She grabbed the spare revolver from the table and fired, her first shot missing, the second grazing the man's shoulder. Elias didn't hesitate. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and knocked the man to the ground. When the struggle ended, the forest was silent again. For a long time, neither of them moved. Hazel's hands trembled as she lowered the revolver. Elias's chest heaved with the weight of what had just happened. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Hazel shook her head, tears running down her face. "You saved mine first." He reached for her, pulling her into his arms. The rifle fell from his hand, forgotten. "They won't stop coming," he murmured into her hair. "Not until someone kills me or someone proves the truth." "Then we'll find proof," she said fiercely. "We'll clear your name." Elias's voice cracked. "The truth burned with my house, Hazel." "Not all of it." She pulled back, eyes blazing. "Someone in that town knows what really happened. Someone lied to protect Cornelius Blackstone, and I'll make them talk." He frowned. "You'd go back there after what they did to you?" "If it means you can live without running, yes." Elias's hands tightened on her shoulders. "You'd risk everything for me?" She looked up at him, eyes full of fierce tenderness. "You risked everything for me the moment you brought me in from the cold. It's my turn now." He kissed her then, hard, desperate, full of the fear that loving her had given him something to lose again. When they finally broke apart, Hazel whispered, "We can do this, together." Elias closed his eyes, forehead resting against hers. "If we go back, there's no turning around." "I don't want to turn around," she said. Outside, the wind carried the smell of smoke and gunpowder. Inside, a new resolve burned brighter than the fire in the hearth. The hunted man and the woman the world had sold for $30 were no longer running from ghosts. They were walking straight into the lion's den, hand in hand. Dawn broke cold and red over the valley. Smoke rose from the chimneys of Blackstone as Elias and Hazel descended the ridge, cloaked and silent, each step heavy with the weight of what waited below. It had been nearly 2 years since Elias last saw the town. 2 years since they'd called him murderer, monster, madman. Now he was coming back not to beg, but to end it. Hazel walked beside him, her face pale but steady. Beneath her coat, she hid the folded bounty poster and a single letter she'd found among Elias's old things. A scorched page signed Martha Thornwood, written the night before the fire. She didn't yet know if it would save them, but she clung to it as if it were scripture. They reached the edge of town just after sunrise. People were already gathering at the square, drawn by rumor. 3 dead bounty hunters found near the ridge. Word traveled fast. The sheriff, a broad man with a whiskey-red face, stood on the steps of the courthouse, hand on his gun belt, and beside him, waiting like a vulture, was Mayor Cornelius Blackstone himself. When the first villager spotted Elias, a murmur ran through the crowd. "It's him! The killer! The monster from the woods!" Elias stopped in the street, his rifle slung but his eyes burning. Hazel stood beside him, trembling yet defiant. Cornelius smirked. "Well, I'll be damned. The ghost returns to confess?" Elias's voice carried like thunder. "I came to finish what you started, Cornelius. You framed me. You killed my family." The mayor laughed, loud and false. "You've lost your mind, Thornwood. Everyone here knows you set that fire yourself. You were drunk, raving, said God told you to burn the sin from your house." "That's a lie," Hazel said sharply, stepping forward. "You're the one who stole his land and blamed him to hide it." Cornelius sneered. "And who are you, the whore he picked up in the woods?" The crowd gasped. Hazel flinched, but her voice didn't break. "I'm the woman who's going to prove you're a murderer." She reached into her coat and pulled out the letter, the charred edges trembling in her hand. "This was written by Martha Thornwood," she said. "I found it buried under the stone hearth where your men missed it." Cornelius's face went pale. Hazel read aloud, her voice ringing clear. "If something happens to me or Daniel, it won't be Elias's doing. The mayor came again today, demanding we sell the land. When Elias refused, he said we'd burn for our pride. If this reaches anyone, know my husband loved us more than life." Martha Thornwood, October 3rd, 1890. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Disbelief? Then anger. The sheriff's hand dropped from his holster. "Is that your wife's handwriting, Thornwood?" Elias nodded once. "Every word." Cornelius took a step forward, his composure cracking. "It's a forgery. Lies from a desperate man." But Elias was already moving. He threw the bounty poster into the dirt at Cornelius's feet. "You built your fortune on graves. You killed my family, ruined my name, and hunted me like a dog." Cornelius drew his pistol, but Elias was faster. The shot echoed like judgment itself. The mayor's gun flew from his hand. As Elias's bullet tore through his shoulder, he screamed, stumbling backward into the dust. "Elias!" Hazel cried. "Don't!" But Elias's voice was calm, deadly calm. "I'm done running, Hazel. I just want the truth." The sheriff stepped between them, rifle half raised but hesitant. "Mayor, is it true? Did you threaten the Thornwoods?" Cornelius clutched his wound, pale as ash. "You think anyone will believe a fat girl and a madman?" Before he could finish, another voice cut through the crowd, old and trembling. "I will." It was Dr. Maynard, the town's aging physician. He pushed forward, holding a small leather book. "I kept records from that night," he said. "The burns, the angle of the fire. It started outside, not inside. Someone poured kerosene through the windows." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "And who had kerosene that night, Doctor?" "Only the mayor," the old man whispered. "Only Cornelius Blackstone." The crowd erupted. Shouts, curses, cries for justice. Cornelius tried to run, but the sheriff caught him by the collar and dragged him down the courthouse steps. Elias stood motionless, the rifle still in his hand. He looked lost, as if the ground beneath him no longer felt real. Hazel touched his arm gently. "It's over, Elias. You're free." He turned to her, the fury fading from his face, replaced by something fragile and raw. "I don't even know what freedom feels like anymore." Hazel smiled through her tears. "Then let me teach you." Behind them, the bells of Blackstone rang, not for judgment this time, but for truth. The crowd parted as Elias and Hazel walked away together, leaving the ashes of his past behind. For the first time in years, the hunted man didn't look over his shoulder. He looked forward. Spring came to the mountains like a quiet apology. The snow melted from the pines, the river swelled with thaw, and sunlight spilled across the valley where Elias Thornwood had finally laid down his rifle. The cabin that had once been a refuge from the world was now a home. The walls smelled of smoke and bread, not fear. A handmade cradle sat by the hearth, polished smooth from the touch of Elias's rough hands. Hazel stood by the window, watching the wind move through the trees like a slow tide. Her belly had rounded softly beneath her apron. Proof of life. Proof that something good had survived the fire and the storm. When Elias came in from the yard, his shirt dusted with sawdust and pine, she smiled as if the world had never broken them at all. "Fence is mended," he said, hanging his coat. "I'll head down to the river for fish before dusk." Hazel turned, her eyes bright. "You still work like a man who owes the world something." Elias smiled, a small, quiet smile that reached the corners of his scarred face. "Maybe I just want to earn what I've been given." She walked to him, slipping her hands into his. "You've already earned it. Every morning you wake up and choose kindness, you earn it again." He looked at her for a long moment, and then pulled her into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, like she had been carved from the same stubborn earth that shaped him. Outside, the light turned gold. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the bells of Blackstone rang again. This time not for guilt or gossip, but for a wedding that the town had decided to celebrate properly. Hazel and Elias had not returned to live among them, but they'd accepted the peace offering, a letter of apology, a promise that their names would be cleared forever. Sometimes Elias still dreamed of the fire. Sometimes he woke gasping, hands shaking, but every time Hazel was there, warm, solid, whispering, "You're home, you're safe." And every time the nightmare lost a little more of its power. That evening, as the sun fell behind the peaks, they sat together by the door. The air smelled of pine and new grass. Hazel leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice a soft murmur. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "if people like us were meant to find each other?" Elias looked toward the fading horizon. "No," he said. "I don't wonder. I know." He kissed her forehead, his hand resting over her heart, feeling its steady rhythm, the sound of life returning after long silence. "You're safe here," he whispered. "It's your home now, if you'll have it." Hazel smiled through the glow of the firelight. "I already do." The last light slipped behind the mountains. The wind quieted, and for the first time in his life, Elias Thornwood didn't feel like the world's enemy. He felt like a man finally forgiven. Their story didn't end with rescue or revenge. It ended with peace, and the promise that love, no matter how scarred, no matter how late, can always find its way home. Stories like Elias and Hazel's remind us that monsters are often born from lies, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is believe in someone the world has already condemned. Love isn't about saving a perfect soul. It's about choosing to stand beside a broken one and saying, "You're safe here." Wherever you're listening from tonight, a crowded city, a quiet farm, a mountain far away, remember this: healing doesn't ask for beauty or innocence. It asks for courage. If you still believe love can redeem even the damned, the next story is waiting for you.